welcome Red Eyes Creations members. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for being here. We are continuing our fascinating discussion with Kenn Thomas. We have been talking about many things, mainly I guess about the agenda actually of the octopus. And one thing that I do want to continue with in this segment is to ask Kenn a little bit about I guess the main agenda of the octopus, if that has been something that has been possible to map out, so to speak, along the way. I guess, Kenn, that you've been researching this for a lot of years now. You're well versed in the material and a lot of the conspiracies out there. And I mean, to you, is it getting easier all the time? I mean, do you get a clearer picture, or is the waters getting more muddy along the way here, so to speak?
Well, I guess it really depends on which topic you're talking about. I mean, I'm sure we have, for instance, a great deal of clarity on who killed JFK, for instance. But I think if you're trying to talk about the overarching agenda of something like the octopus, it seems to me that people come up against it time and again, and that is perpetual warfare. Why are in the face of all common sense and logic, why are so many of the Earth's resources devoted to simply destroying property and killing people,
right?
And profiteering from that? And there's a reason for that, and it's an unnatural one, and it's a conspiracy, kind of a structural conspiracy that has been identified, very variously by different people. But the one term that everybody seems to resonate with is something called the military-industrial complex.
Right.
And that was the term that Eisenhower came up with right before he resigned as president of the United States.
Right.
And, so if I was to say what was the agenda, it is to keep that going, to keep military profiteers from profiteering, or to continue to profiteer from a kind of meaningless and senseless slaughter and war.
So is this just a bunch of, bored old men that have nothing better to do to get a rush than to control the means and the finance of the planet and have the dumbed down populace at each other's throat, killing each other? I mean,
yeah, well, I'm sure they're very serious about controlling and maintaining and furthering their own power. I don't know if that's a very boring thing to do. I mean, it's monstrously evil, but
yeah, sure.
I don't think it's really done as like a hobby or anything. I just, after the Second World War, it seemed to be that the way to, in order to maintain power and dominance over the rest of the world, you can't just fall back on the rhetoric that we've always had in this country about free elections and democracy.
Right.
You have to create a global intelligence bureaucracy that subverts that very principle. It's the only way to maintain power.
And I mean, the thing that the question is, are we at the hands of a psychopathic mentality, meaning that actually a few people that have the right properties, if you will, within their mentality and their lack, I guess, of morality, have reached the top and now are just interested in finding new people that can continue this agenda and also to perpetuate that agenda, meaning that we're really in the hands of people that are unsane, they're insane, they're not if we would define the term human today, I guess we would apply certain kinds of morality, laws of morality almost to that. But these people seem to lack it. Would you agree on that or not?
There doesn't seem to be, any sense of anything that we would normally kind of observe as decency or, the values of common human solidarity involved in this kind of power mongering.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you bring up the idea that are these people even human, because you do have people on the circuit like David Icke, for instance, who thinks that they're all shape-shifting reptilians.
Yeah.
And even at the very beginning of this discussion of this idea of the military-industrial complex, that comes, right after a whole great deal of what's at least lore in the ufological subculture about Eisenhower having had secret meetings with aliens themselves.
Yeah.
And this is the topic of one of my other talks there at the Before Knowledge conference. Is Wilhelm Reich? The title of the talk, the full title is actually Wilhelm Reich, Eisenhower's Secret Ally Against the Aliens.
Mm.
And what I'm looking at that primarily there is that there are these, and you have to go into the presidential record to try to match up what the lore is with what the documents are, but there are these stories about Eisenhower meeting with aliens, and there are these stories about Eisenhower meeting with Wilhelm Reich.
Mm-hmm.
Now, will your listeners have any familiarity with Reich at all, or should I?
I hope that many do, because I mean he's an important man to have an eye on here. But for those who might be new listeners, or for those who can't remember at the moment, please give us a background on Reich a little bit.
Okay, well, Wilhelm Reich was a student of Sigmund Freud. He was part of the psychoanalytic community in Vienna, along with Carl Jung, for instance. There's like a dozen or so of them. But Reich was eventually expelled from studying psychoanalysis under Sigmund Freud himself because he was a communist. And then later he was expelled from the Communist Party because he was too much of a psychoanalyst. He was like this maverick figure in the study of human psychology who had this long and interesting history that ended in the United States in the 1950s. Basically, with him in jail, but just prior to that, he had conducted these battles out in the Arizona desert against UFOs using a technology that he developed called orgone, the manipulation of orgone energy in something called cloudbuster guns.
Right. And
during this entire episode, he was making regular reports to the U.S. government, and he believed that he had the support and the backing of the Eisenhower administration. So if you read the standard biographies, what you get is, here's a crazy paranoid guy who really thought that Eisenhower was behind these imaginary battles that he was having with flying saucers out in the desert in the 1950s.
Mm.
So the whole thrust of this talk that I'm giving, though, is to demonstrate that, in fact, he did have the attention of the Eisenhower administration. The Air Force did take him seriously. They even developed their own cloudbuster guns in the 60s, and there's lots of documentary proof. And in the process of pursuing all this, you find actually the what can be considered absolute proof, unless there's some other standard that I don't understand, of the existence of something called MJ-12.
Right.
And MJ-12 is a secret government group, supposedly, that was created in response to the Roswell crash. Well, you can't prove that. You can't prove the Roswell crash. You can't prove every claim that's made on the UFO circuit. But one thing you can prove when you study this record is that there was such a group, and that it was in communication with Wilhelm Reich and his assistants.
That's interesting. And
yeah.
Well,
and again, all this is happening in the backdrop of the Eisenhower administration, which eventually, at the end of that, Eisenhower gets up and says, look, this has gone too far. We're in this weird thing called the military-industrial complex, and I can no longer be a part of it. I'm going to retire, and I'm going to give you this one last speech to say that this is, that these developments are really bringing the world down into the wrong path.
And he might just have been one then of the presidents that understand that he might have gone into this position with an idea that, okay, now I'm going to be, the boss of the world here, basically the most powerful man on the globe. But slowly he might have begun to realize that, no, actually I'm not. There's this entire slurry of men behind me that actually are controlling my every move, and I can't do what I can't do whatever I want, or can't,
I think Eisenhower probably more so than any other president, because this is the 50s. Remember, this is the beginning of the advertising age,
right,
and public relations, and the office is becoming much more a public relations office and less one that wielded any real power. probably you're right. That's a good point. You're right. Eisenhower probably recognized that first because that's when it was happening first. But you see, there's all this other material. This kind of gets into the other talk that I'm giving about Maury Island, because there are those people out there who believe that Kennedy was shot because he was about to expose all this business about the Roswell aliens. And while I don't think that is true, the other lecture that I'm giving at Beyond Knowledge goes into examining more concretely what the historic trail leaves behind that connects the Kennedy assassination to the military-industrial complex. And, that's the way I see it. I think that's the way Jim Garrison, who was, who prosecuted Clay Shaw for Kennedy's assassination back in 1968, that was the subject of Oliver Stone's movie.
Right.
He believed that the assassination was a product of the military-industrial complex, just as Eisenhower had defined it.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is... yeah, continue.
Yeah, so when you start looking at it, there are these connections between the Kennedy assassination and UFOs. They just don't necessarily... I mean, it's like, there are two forms of Marxism. There are very well-educated views of how Marxism works, and then there's vulgar Marxism. Well, the same thing is true of ufology. There's a vulgar ufological concept out there that Kennedy was killed because of Roswell, which isn't true. But Kennedy was probably killed because... Actually, Kennedy's assassin was probably, according to Garrison and according to my research, was probably a guy named Fred Krisman.
Okay.
And Fred Krisman, prior to that assassination, was known as a witness to something called the Maury Island UFO in 1947.
Give us the background on that one.
In 1947, 3 days before the famous sighting by Kenneth Arnold in Mount Rainier and up in the same part of the country in the American Northwest, there was an incident in which some guys who were patrolling a harbor in Puget Sound, up there in the state of Washington, basically what their business was in lumbering. When they chop down trees, they brand them so that the proper, when the lumber is bought, the proper company is paid for. And every once in a while, a log will break free, and people, will go out and salvage those logs, find the brand, and return it to the company for a reward. That's what these guys were doing out in the harbor one afternoon when several saucers descended upon them. There were like a half a dozen of them. One in the middle was wobbling, and it was right over a harbor boat in Puget Sound. The wobbling saucer started to spew out two kinds of material, a black and a white kind of material, out and onto the boat. Part of that material hit the crew's dog and killed it. Another part hit the arm of the son of the main witness, a guy named Harold Dahl, and wounded the kid's arm. And then one of the saucers tapped the wobbling one. It straightened up, and they all flew off.
Okay.
And Harold Dahl then went to what is described as his boss, although if you look at the record, the ship was actually registered in Dahl's name. But he goes to Fred Krisman, who's this shadowy figure that I tracked through this lecture all through up until the point he dies in the mid-'70s. And Fred Krisman goes down to Puget Sound and then later reports that at that point he saw one other saucer. So he's not really to the main event. He's supposedly the only witness to an event in addition to that. One way or another, he's kind of artificially grafted onto this UFO event. Right. Again, it was 3 days before, there was a massive, this is the story of UFOs. UFOs have been seen by people on the planet for as long as there's been a planet.
Right.
The modern wave of UFOs